Hello, everybody, and welcome to another community
First of all, Mayor,
conversation.
thank you very much for giving me the
on
opportunity
Facebook
to
Live. It's
speak
Friday at
today.
noon.
Just one portion of that.
Economic impact of
I served many vendors before.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, thanks for this opportunity.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another community conversation right here on Facebook Live. I'm Mayor Eric Pappenfuss, and we've got a very special show today in honor of Women's History Month. And we're going to be exploring the impact of Frances Ellen Watkins Harper and the African American women of the old 8th Ward in Harrisburg. We've got a number of guests today. They're all part of the coalition that has been behind the Commonwealth Monument Project, and this is really another in a continuation of shows about the history in Harrisburg and about the movement behind that monument. And we'll get to it in just a moment. I want to begin, as we always do, with the latest data relating to coronavirus. Obviously, we saw the creation of a new drive-through vaccine clinic in Hack over the past week that has really done a lot to help make the vaccine more available to Harrisburg and Dauphin County residents. We're pleased with that. As a reminder, I want to make it clear that while there is light at the end of the tunnel, though, we're still very much in the midst of the pandemic. And there is some good news from the wastewater reporting folks at BioBot. Moment, if you bring up our graph, you'll see that we continue to be down. We're back at a rate that is slightly higher than what we experienced last summer, but is obviously sustained and down from the high points that we experienced in December and January. So that's good news. If you look at where Harrisburg is in relationship to other communities, we're decidedly in the middle of the pack. We're in the 49th percentile level, in relationship to other quantifiable samples. And what that means is it means that we've got about 65 new cases a day occurring in Harrisburg as determined through the sampling of the wastewater. That's still a lot, and it's extremely contagious. And there was a new development this past week, which is also alarming, but not unexpected. And that is, you've probably heard something about the B1 variant of COVID that was first detected in the United Kingdom. It's sort of a virulent strain, a mutation of COVID, and that was detected here as we tested for it over the past week in Harrisburg. So it's already spread here. The best response is to continue as we have, focusing on the vaccine and making sure that everybody realizes it is safe and effective. Since we taped last, I was able to get my first shot, and I know that there are appointments available through UPMC or in Hershey or at the drive-through clinic. Folks do need to get on the list and make an appointment. But hopefully we're going to be in a much better place soon as more and more people get vaccinated. So that's the latest COVID news. I also want to just make clear a couple of announcements for things that the city is sponsoring in the upcoming week. Coming up on March 30th at 10 a.m., our small business folks here at the city are sponsoring a webinar called Small Business Financing Options During COVID-19. And this will be a very informative session. It'll feature speakers from the Community First Fund, Pinion Banks, and the U.S. Small Business Administration. And it'll help talk through options for your small business and resources that are available. You can register for this at no charge on the city's website. So just go to harrisburgpa.gov/workshops and sign up. So that's coming up on March 30th at 10 a.m., one in a continuing series of webinars that are geared towards helping our small businesses. And then, very importantly, coming up on Tuesday, April 6th, the city of Harrisburg is going to be co-hosting a one-day virtual symposium on environmental justice. And this is something we're doing in collaboration with the Pennsylvania DEP Office of Environmental Justice, Harrisburg University, and the Pennsylvania Environmental Resource Consortium, and lots of other partners. And the event aims to create regional environmental justice hubs throughout the Commonwealth in order to build an active and enduring environmental justice network in Pennsylvania. You can find details about the symposium and other information about how to participate also on our website, harrisburgpa.gov. I think Moman's got it right up there. We're proud to help sponsor this, and we hope it'll be the first of many such symposia in the future. But now let's turn to the topic at hand, and I am pleased as always to welcome my friend Lenwood Sloan, Executive Director of the Commonwealth Monument Project. Lenwood, it is great to have you on the program, and why don't you set the stage for us a little bit here?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm really glad to be here. Special thanks to the city of Harrisburg for supporting this place-making initiative and creating the Irvis Equality Circle, a site of reflection on Walnut and 4th Street, where the old historic Old 8th Ward once was. The circle stands at the foot of Tanner's Alley, a site on the Underground Railroad, and underneath the structure of the Irvis building, Mr. Mayor, and the city knows that it is the home of the House of Representatives. Underneath that structure is the footprint of the Masonic Auditorium of 1850 through the 1900s. It was the hub of social life of that valued, now vanished community, and many of the names that you'll find on the monument were members and founders of that community's social and benevolent organization who provided loans and buried citizens, and weddings and banquets and funerals and meetings, discussions and dialogues were there. And we've dedicated this program to the solidarity of the social and civic organizations, the Prince Hall Masons and the Order of the Eastern Stars. And because this month is Women's Month, we wanted to especially call out and salute the Grand Chapter historian, Miss Brenda Wilkinson Monroe, and she brings you greetings, sir, from the Grand Worthy Master and the Grand Worthy Matron of the Prince Hall Masons and the Order of the Eastern Stars.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the invite. My name is Brenda Wilkerson Monroe, and I bring you greetings from Rowena R. Wooten, from chapter number 95, Grand Worthy Matron of Deborah Grand Chapter, Order of the Eastern Stars, Prince Hall adopted, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We are truly thankful for the invite.
Well, we're very glad to have you here, and thank you for the greetings. And Moment had some photos of the monument up as you were talking, Lenwood. And this is, of course, at 4th and Walnut Streets. It features 4 life-size bronze figures standing around an iconic orator's pedestal, and then the names of 100 voices of the old 8th Ward are literally embronzed on the 4 sides of that pedestal. It's already transformed the streetscape there around the Capitol complex. Folks are coming from far and wide to view the monument, and it's very interactive, as you can see from the photo there. Talk to us, Lenwood, a little bit more for maybe those who haven't seen it. Tell us the story that the monument is conveying.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for referring to it as a story, because it's an animated moment. This is an allegorical moment that was lifted from several articles. One that says that Frederick Douglass spoke on that corner, and in fact there is a Pennsylvania Historic and Museum Commission blue and gold sign on the corner that confirms that Frederick Douglass spoke there with William Lloyd Garrison to support the franchise. Another says that the community met there on the reading of the 15th Amendment, and a gathering at the crossroads of the old 8th Ward occurred, which is the name of the monument. 4 famous African-American elocutionists stand around an iconic orator's pedestal. They are Thomas Morris Chester, Jacob T. Compton, William Howard Day, and Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. In Women's Month, sir, we say her full name because her life and her name are a map. After reading the 15th Amendment, Ms. Harper is handing the 15th Amendment back to Mr. William Howard Day as Compton bears witness and Chester takes note. And she's handing the 15th Amendment back, sir, as if to say, I don't see women in this amendment anywhere. It would take another 50 years for Pennsylvania to become the seventh state to ratify the 19th Amendment. But by that time, the old Eighth Ward was gone through eminent domain.
Yes, it's a powerful narrative, Lenwood, and it's one that I think is deeply moving to all those who see it. Now, the bronze figure of Ms. Harper is the first African American woman statue on the Capitol grounds. That in and of itself is extraordinary. And I'd like to welcome Reverend Yvette Davis from the Monument Project's Communications Department to talk a little bit about how Frances Harper was chosen for the monument.
Thank you so much, Mayor Papenfuse. We began our exploration of Frances Harper's life by convening a coalition of scholars, journalists, humanists, and educators to share their compound research. We called them the Frances Project. One of the first contributors was journalist and author Miss Angela Dotson, who is with us today.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, Ms. Dodson. Welcome to the program. Now, Reverend Davis, I understand you have prepared some questions for Ms. Dodson, so go ahead, take it away.
Thank you. So, Angela, could you share a bit about the book we'd like to introduce today?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My book is, as you see behind me, Remember the Ladies, celebrating those who fought for freedom at the ballot box. I don't know if you can see the one I'm holding up. And it came out in 2017. It's published by Center Street, which is part of the Hachette Book Publishing Group. And it is a comprehensive and inclusive look at the women's suffrage movement. It's a fresh look at it that includes a lot about how the women's suffrage movement is tied to many other movements. Most of the people who helped start the movement were abolitionists. Many of them were actively involved in the Underground Railroad, and many of them were part of what they called the free produce movement, which was basically a boycott of any goods made by enslaved labor. People in the Philadelphia area were particularly active in that. And they had stores and groups that educated themselves about what goods not to buy. And it would have required extreme sacrifice. They couldn't use sugar or cotton or rice or tobacco, those kinds of products, possibly molasses, many things. So my book looks at the beginnings of the movement in that era when they were all working together. And many of them also were involved in the temperance movement, as Frances Harper was. We'll talk about that later, maybe. And it looks at a lot of individuals within the movement. It is not a long, dull history of suffrage. It is rather almost a series of vignettes about different people, different subjects. It's not a straight narrative. You don't have to particularly read it in any order. It's almost like a magazine. You could pick it up and leave it and come back to it. My publisher refers to it as an almanac almost. So it's a different way of looking at the movement, and I hope people will avail themselves of the opportunity to read it. So.
Thank you. So why is Frances Ellen Watkins Harper so important as an African-American suffragist?
One is because she was one of the earliest of, suffragists, period, but she's certainly one of the earliest of African-American women to begin speaking out and begin attending meetings. Her activism was concurrent with the Sojourner Truth, for instance, but of the two, Ellen Harper was more educated, was more eloquent. Sojourner Truth was widely known and spoke out, but she didn't have the education that Ellen Harper did, and had a different effect on audiences, I believe, than she did. And Ellen Harper stayed active for a long time. She was born in 1825. She was still active when she died in 1911. So that gave her a long trajectory within the movement, and she was well thought of by many, many people, and certainly was effective.
Thank you for that. And finally, why is Frances Ellen Watkins Harper relevant to the current Black Lives Matter and women's movements?
I think partly because she demonstrates that those are not necessarily separate things. She was able to be active in both kinds of movements. She was certainly outspoken on behalf of African Americans, particularly after the Civil War, when she spoke out for the 15th Amendment, which gave Black men the vote. But she remained active in the women's suffrage movement and remained friendly with suffragists, certainly the ones that agreed with her, and still earned the respect of people who didn't agree with her. So those things are important. One of the things I think we need to learn from the women's suffrage movement is the importance of building coalitions and with working with people, even when they don't agree with you 100% on everything. So that's part of her contribution.
Wow. Well, thank you, Ms. Dodson, for that incredible information about Ms. Harper. Now, I understand you have another project in the works. Can you briefly tell us just a little bit about that?
Well, I'm working on a number of things. In addition to being an author, I am frequently a ghostwriter for other people and have done that for about a dozen years. So I'm working on a project about someone who was not necessarily a well-known civil rights figure themselves, but was involved in a very important juncture of civil rights history, and who is telling the story of their life for the first time. So that's one of the things that I'm actively involved in. And I'm also researching and doing a book proposal on some of the people who shaped the Harlem Renaissance. And in some ways would be similar to Remember the Ladies, because it looks at individuals and how they worked together and built coalitions with other people. We think of the Harlem Renaissance as kind of accidental, that it just occurred because all of these smart, intelligent people showed up in Harlem at the same time. And it wasn't really. It was an active civil rights initiative that civil rights organizations thought through, promoted through their particular publications, by creating events, by creating publications for people to appear in, by even arranging for people like Langston Hughes or to receive support from sometimes wealthy white benefactors. And it was intentional to build a better, broader vision of who the quote unquote new Negro was. So I'm looking at that and promoting the idea, doing the research, in hopes of being able to publish something.
Wow, that sounds fascinating. Well, thank you, Ms. Dodson and Reverend Davis. I hope everybody will pick up a copy of Remember the Ladies. And if you haven't, we'll go and check out the Commonwealth Monument Project, because it is absolutely incredible to view in person. Those photos almost don't do it justice. One of the themes, it seems, of Frances Harper's life, as well as one of the reasons that the Commonwealth Monument Project has been so successful, is the theme of collaboration and building coalitions. And so, with that as a segue, Mr. Sloan, can we talk a little bit about the very successful collaboration that is occurring with Messiah University?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. So those of you who know Harrisburg know that 4th and Walnut Street, where the Monuments Irvis Circle is right behind Strawberry Square, and it's in the shadow of the Irvis building. On 3rd Street, Mr. Mayor, 1 block away, was the Federal Bounty Office. And bounty hunters entered the old 8th Ward because they knew that it was a Underground Railroad safe space and a junction, and they put up signs all over the 8th Ward, wanted this person. We began to appropriate that sign and started putting up signs, wanted anyone who knows the history of these 100 people. We call them the 100 voices of the old 8th Ward. Our goal was to curate the 100 voices and their families, to construct their biographies, to search for their descendants, and to provide their descendants with a bridge and a pathway home where they could stand on that spot and claim their legacy and their history. To educate current residents in the community about the richness of that history, and to create an intergenerational stewardship of those names. And that's where Messiah University came in. Through a grant that Messiah secured from small colleges, they were able to use their students to create that search for the 100 voices.
That's terrific. Well, let me welcome now Monument Project Committee member Dr. Jean Corey from Messiah University. And she can speak a little bit about some of the women that are honored via the monument's pedestal. Dr. Corey, welcome.
Oh, thanks so much. It's great to be here. And I have to say, this was really the most energizing, important work that I'm the director of the Center for Public Humanities, and our student fellows were very closely involved with this. And it's been the most important work our students have done. We've learned so much through our co-educators like Linwood and Caleb. And it's just been a fabulous experience for us. We were tasked with constructing biographies, and what we learned is that's easier said than done. So we learned a lot on that end. So the 100 voices, 34 of them were women. And those biographies were a little bit more difficult to construct because their texts are not found in the archives. Their letters, the supporting documents that we think about when we do history, they're not in the archives. We couldn't find pictures of some of these things. We could find newspaper articles. And thanks to Caleb Jackson, who is very quick at connecting us with lots and lots and lots of newspaper articles that talk about the women in some way, but or talk about something they were part of, we had to reconstruct this history. And that was really a great task for us. We learned a lot. And our students worked on this collection of biographies, and thanks to David Pettigrew and Katie Wingert and Caleb Jackson, we have the book 100 Voices. On the pedestal, there's the 34 voices. Can you stop the pictures for a second? They're getting a little bit ahead of me. The 34 voices that of the women. Linwood asked me to highlight 3 of them. And what I really love, I so love walking by Frances Harper. I've known about her work for a very long time because I did some research on her. I'm an English professor as well. So I was very familiar with her work because I'd written an article on her. But what I didn't know is how I would find some of these commonalities of Frances Harper's life and her work in the women that I researched. So the first woman is Anne Amos. And Anne Amos is one of those people that we don't have any picture of. We don't have any text. Now you can bring up the pictures if you want. We don't have any picture. We don't have any text, but um, we do have some articles about her. And so she introduced, we know that she often was alongside William Howard Day. She was at a conference of ministers, and she was the one that introduced, was the only woman there. We also know that she often read papers at large gatherings of mostly men. And I was interested, it says read papers, but actually it was unladylike for women to speak. And so it doesn't say that she delivered a speech. It says she read papers at these events. But she was a grand scribe. She was the grand deputy of the very first organization, Good Samaritan, which is associated with the Odd Fellows. And the very first one in the whole nation. She was the grand deputy of that. But she also worked alongside her husband in the Underground Railroad. She started a kindergarten she started a early childhood school at Wesley Union AME Zion at the time of the Underground Railroad. And then she went south and she was teacher in the schools in the South during Reconstruction. She came back and she was a very strong advocate for the vote and temperance movement. And then she died in 1911. But she really resonates with what Frances Harper says is this grandly constructive work of women, making the world a better place for women and a place where everyone, I mean, the future, our children and their children would ensure that they had agency and right to shape the world they lived in. And that's what I love about finding most of these women. This is true, but Anne Amos, we do have a lot more evidence in newspapers about her very important work. The next person that Linwood asked us to highlight is Hannah Braxton Jones, and she's another person that she didn't publish. We don't have texts that she read. We do have pictures because we know her descendants, and her descendants are very engaged in the same kinds of work that Hannah Braxton Jones is, and that is civil and human rights. Her great granddaughter is a immigration lawyer in Baltimore that just stepped down from being a federal immigration judge. And her great granddaughter, Marion Dornell, is recently died, but a published poet. But Anna Braxton Jones, alongside her father, her mother died when she was 17. She lived in the old 8th Ward. We know that she owned her house in the old 8th Ward at the time it was raised. But when she was 17 years old, shortly after her mother died, she started Second Baptist Church with her father, Joseph. And we have through their church archives, we know that she was one of the people at the table with her father, Joseph. This is Hannah and her husband. Her husband was also a minister at Second Baptist. And she was a musician. She did a lot of fundraising. She brought Marian Anderson here as part of the fundraising efforts. She was also very involved with the temperance movement. And so on her census card, it says she was a domestic, the same thing as Anne Amos. So that's what it says that her occupation was, that domestic, but we know that her work was grandly constructive and really shaped our city and really shaped the future of African Americans and envisioning themselves as agents in shaping our world. And that's a great legacy to stand on. The third person is Esther Popel. And Angela, 3 of the figures actually are involved with the Harlem Renaissance. Esther Popel's one of them, which was very exciting to discover that. But Esther Popel was a young poet. She was even a poet. Caleb has wonderful poems that she wrote when she was in high school. She graduated from Central High School, and she went to Dickinson, the first African American student to go to Dickinson, but she was not allowed to live there. She had to go back and forth between her home on Balm Street in Harrisburg and Dickinson. But she is a, you know, highly esteemed poet of the Renaissance, of the Harlem Renaissance. The fun thing about Esther Popel is Dickinson has her papers, and among those are her lovely diary of when she was an 18-year-old living on Baum Street. And her discussion, you know, she's in and out and connected to all these people that we've been researching on the Eighth Ward. So it's really fun to read. I mean, it's just fun to read a young girl's diary and experience her girlhood in Harrisburg. But anyway, that's on the Dickinson website. So if you're interested, and you can go and read it for yourself. If you're interested in any of these women, though, I hope you are. We do have, along with our book, 100 Voices that you can get at Midtown Scholar, or you can get at Good Brothers Cafe, or you can order from Amazon if you want a copy, or you can download it as well. But also on our website, digitalharrisburg.com, we have all of these 100 voices are listed, and we have the materials that we have posted in folders, so you can go look. And we hope that if you have more, we would love for you to contribute. If you have pictures, if you have anything that would help us document the stories that are so hard to find, please do contact digitalharrisburg.com. That would be fabulous.
Hey, thank you, Dr. Corey. Boy, I wholeheartedly recommend everyone check out digitalharrisburg.com. It's an incredible resource and a wonderful, just a wonderful amalgamation of information. And I think the stories that you have that you've sort of highlighted here are really just the tip of the iceberg with regard to the old Eighth Ward and Harrisburg's history. And I do encourage everyone as well to pick up a copy of 100 Voices. It's easy to read. You can dip into it, and it is biographical in nature and a great introduction to the history of the period. So, thanks for that, and for giving us a greater understanding of those names that we find on the Order's pedestal at the Commonwealth Monument Project. So. Let's also talk a little bit about some of the names of the women that are found there that were part of the Order of the Eastern Stars. Now, our special guest, Grand Chapter Historian Brenda Wilkerson Monroe of the Order of the Eastern Stars, is also joined today by Grand Historian Felix Gardenhire of the Prince Hall Masons. So let's start. Madam, would you please tell us about the founding of the Order of the Eastern Stars and the formation of their chapter in Harrisburg's Old Eighth Ward?
Absolutely. I'm going to give you the chronological history of the organization. The organization itself started in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, with Esther Chapter Number 1, which was established on May the 1st, 1900. The first worthy matron was Elizabeth Snyder, who was the founder. It took 5 chapters to come together in order to form a grand body. Pennsylvania Grand Chapter. The young lady that we want to spend most of our time to speak about is Hattie M. Grant. She was born Harriet St. Clair. She married James W. Grant. When Pennsylvania formed the grand body, Hattie Grant, who is our foundation, the reason for our existence, established this organization on November the 8th, 1909. From 1909 to 1915, for 6 years, she stayed in that position to make sure the court in the chapter was solid so that she can move forward. In 1916 of July 17, Pennsylvania Grand Chapter, Order of Eastern Star, renamed itself to Deborah Grand Chapter and was chartered then. But because of our foundation, we are here today. This organization is over 120 years old. It was known back in the day as the Negro Organization. Because of Hattie, we was able to go forth, and now from us came the Divine Nine. So this is a very prominent organization. Hattie, if it was not for you, I would not be here today. That is the chronological history of Deborah Grand Chapter.
Well, that's fascinating, important history that that we need to hear. Mr. Gardenhire, let me go to you. And would you like to add a little bit more about where we can find the Prince Hall Masons and the Eastern Stars in Harrisburg today?
Yes, had to unmute myself. Again, Mayor Pappenfuss, thanks for having us today. Um, Sister Monroe gave you basically how we started and became a grand chapter, but there were some grand masters who were very instrumental in making that happen during, I would say, about 15 to 16-year period. And the first was John L. Thomas, who is also a member of the 100 Voices and is on the pedestal of the monument that we previously spoke of. And he was an undertaker in Harrisburg in the 8th Ward, and he became Grand Master in 1899. And he was instrumental in allowing Esther Chapter #1 to be formed. As we move further on, of course, the next Grand Master was James W. Grant, who was Hattie St. Clair husband. And she became, of course, the first Grand Worthy Matron, but her husband was instrumental during that time when they formed the Grand Chapter. He was actually the Grand Master at the time. He's also from Chosen Friends Lodge number 43, as was Joseph L. Thomas. And he was also from that lodge that started the Eastern Stars in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Then we moved to John Paul Scott, who about 6 years later, before they became Deborah Grand Chapter, he was the instrumental in making sure that Pennsylvania Grand Chapter was set apart properly so that they can reorganize and become a Grand Chapter. And in 1916, the year that he went out of office, Deborah Grand Chapter was born, and 5 more chapters were added to that. The other Eastern Stars that I'd always like to mention on a show like this that were important, we've already mentioned, I believe, Hannah Braxton Jones. Well, her granddaughter was Hannah, I believe Hannah, I don't have her name right here, but she's in the 100 Voices book also. I believe Hannah, she's John Paul Scott's daughter. So I believe it's Hannah Cannon, I believe. That's the name that I couldn't get. I couldn't get her last name now. But she is Harriet, and that's also related to our Grand Master in 1914, 1915, John Paul Scott. So we wanted just to, and then Esther Popel, her mother was Helen Popel, and her father was also in Chosen Friends Lodge. And we always use the name Esther in the Order of Eastern Star. The actual name of Esther, as you see it in the Bible, is a Persian name that she was given. And that Persian name, Esther, actually means star. So she is the daughter of Helen Popel, and she was a member of Esther Chapter #1 also. So we always like to make all those connections, that this was a family affair, and all these heroic women in the Order of Eastern Stars who did all these heroic things and supported the Prince Hall Masons were also members of the order.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that history. And, you know, Lenwood, it really seems, continuing on this theme of collaboration, that there were so many community organizations that really form the sort of cohesion and sense of community for people in the old Eighth Ward. We also talk about some of the other, maybe specifically African American women's organizations that were very important to the old Eighth Ward?
Yes, their stories are so important because they were the framework, the architecture and the engineering of social organizations in the African American community in Harrisburg in general and the Eastern Stars. The master storyteller of our project is Mr. Caleb Jackson, and I'd like to ask him to speak about the House of Ruth and also the Henry Highland Garnett League.
Welcome, Caleb. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. The Miriam Household of Ruth, chapter number 1, was founded September the 2nd, 1857 in Harrisburg by Joseph Bustle. Now, Joseph Bustle in itself is a famous person who's also on our monument. He was a school teacher in Harrisburg. He was involved in the Underground Railroad, and he's also the uncle of Paul Bustle Robeson. The charter members of this organization were basically Joseph Bustle's wife, Mrs. John Price, a Mrs. John Gator, a Mrs. Robinson, and a Mrs. Jerry Henson. Of our members' names on our pedestal, Susan Sophia Spence, Charlotte Newman, and Josephine L. Bibb were members of the Household of Ruth, and each one played a part in the development of the organization. One of the outstanding elocutionists and speakers was the Josephine L. Bibb, later married to a Davidson. The newspapers always carried the fact that she was a great speaker. Every meeting she would be invited to speak. And I just might add that her son, whose name is also on the pedestal, is the famous A. Denny Bibb, who wrote Lincoln University's alma mater in 1911. So apparently I'm saying the Household of Ruth, the members of the Household of Ruth not only were eloquent in the community, they did so much for the Eighth Ward and the community, but also the families. We see what the sons and the children of what these orders also did. Mentioned the Garnett League, founded around 1865 in Harrisburg, helped to organize the Grand Review, which was held in Harrisburg on November the 14th, 1865. I think most of us know that story. The fact that the African-American USCT were not allowed to march in Washington, but the women, primarily of the Garnett League in Harrisburg, said, well, we can have something here, which they did. And that we have a historic plaque in the Capitol complex that's dedicated to this particular parade. Annie Amos, again, that same people, you notice the same people were always involved in everything. Annie Amos was one of the vice presidents of the Garnett League, and she went south after 1865 and taught school in South Carolina representing the league before returning to Harrisburg. So briefly, that gives you a brief overview of some of the other organizations. The Household of Ruth in Harrisburg still exists. The Garnett League of Women does not exist.
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to add briefly that of the 3 of the 4 figures in the monument, William Howard Day was the keynote speaker of the Grand Review. Thomas Morris Chester was the Grand Marshal of the parade, and Jacob T. Compton marched with the 25th United States Colored Troops. So all 3 of those figures embody the gift that the Garnett League gave to Harrisburg, to Pennsylvania, and to the nation by honoring Black soldiers.
Oh, thank you, Linwood, and thank you, Mr. Jackson, for sharing that important bit of our history with us here today. We're making all sorts of connections on this show, and let's also connect to the present day and turn now to Ms. Yvonne Hollins, who is joining us. Now, everyone knows Ms. Hollins her active civic and social engagement through Harrisburg, through the Boys and Girls Club, through education, through all the many things that she's been involved in. That brings us to the present day, but she is also a descendant of Maud Coleman. And Ms. Hollins, I understand that exemplar Maud Coleman is also honored on the monument. So can you talk a little bit about how you're related and more about her and her family descendants?
Good afternoon to everyone. Before I do that, I just want to say that it's truly a pleasure to be a part of the committee for this just unbelievable initiative. And if it had not been for Phyllis Bennett, who actually contacted me and shared information, and then the committee welcomed me with open arms. So I want to commend the committee for what they have done. Maud B. Coleman. Maud, as she is affectionately, Aunt Maud, as she is affectionately called. I was only 3 years old when Maud passed away. And I've learned so much about her from others' memories, research, and data collection. My mother, Ora E. Eccles, a living legend at the age of 93, who still lives in Harrisburg, still very active, and really values her ability to vote. My cousins, Gail and Kim, Brian, Kim of the Mod Squad, Leon, Caleb, Linwood, and the students of Messiah College reintroduced me and our family to a lady of character, esteem, wit. She was an advocate for women and children, and she was an activist, a politician, and devoted her entire life to securing democracy for all people. I continue to be enlightened by her many contributions, which have impacted individuals, communities at the local, state, and federal level. Mayor, we have been able to identify at least 165 plus descendants of Maud in the greater Harrisburg area, Maryland, New Jersey, California, and Canada.
Wow. I mean, that's amazing. And Lenwood, back to you for a moment. What can you tell us about Maud Coleman and her impact on voter and civil rights?
What an incredible woman she was, Mr. Mayor. Her life began in Harrisburg, where she worked tirelessly at that time as an African-American Republican, the party of Lincoln. She organized the first organization of Black Republican women to vote as soon as the 19th Amendment was passed. She also began to work in the development of what is now the Harrisburg YWCA. She then moved her work to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where she worked in civic and social rights, in housing, in education. She wasn't done. She moved then to Reading, where she began the first literacy programs. And she also worked, Mr. Mayor, with the replacement of Black soldiers who had gone to Germany and had amalgamations with white women, and their children, their mixed-race children, were left behind in Germany as orphans and fosters. And she set up a foster program to bring those children back to America. She was ceaseless in her work, and she worked right up to the very day that she died. A member of the Bethel AME Church, a longtime member of the Republican Party of African American Women, and a soldier for the development of race relationships through the YWCA.
Boy, that is incredible. And Ms. Hollins, if I can come back to you for a moment. So I understand that the Maud Coleman family is now leading and advancing the stewardship of the new monument. That's very exciting. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, this once the monument had been erected, it was shared with me that we would need to do something in order to make sure that we maintain and conserve this monument. So I met with my family, and I'm speaking about the Ross Eccles family. We are the descendants, the Ross Eccles family. And we were able to provide the first $2,500 to be utilized for the maintaining and the preservation of this monument. We continue to encourage individuals to donate to this fund, and asking all descendants of the 100 names on the monument if they would continue to donate so that we can continue to make sure that this particular monument is always pristine. As you walk through the Capitol, you'll notice the others are not well kept. We are going to make sure that this one is well kept. And we want to thank everyone who has donated thus far.
And Mr. Mayor, they have worked with families of the 100 Voices, and they have tripled their original $2,500 contribution. So we're reaching out to families to help us maintain for in perpetuity.
Thank you, Ms. Hans, and thank you to your family, and thank you for all those that are contributing to the ongoing stewardship and maintenance of the monument. That is going to ensure that its legacy is here for generations to come, and will continue to make the impact and tell the stories that we're hearing about today. Well, Elmwood, I think we're coming to a close, but I know that we have some special guests, so I'm going to let you introduce some of our past players.
Yes, and I'll turn to Mr. Kelly Summerford to make the introduction of Living History.
Good afternoon. I am Kelly Summerford. I'm the treasurer of the Commonwealth Monument Project and company manager of the Pennsylvania Past Players Living History Interpreters. It gives me great pleasure and personal honor to introduce Frances Ella Watkins Harper. Frances Ella Watkins Harper was an abolitionist, woman suffragette, poet, teacher, orator, and writer, and one of the first African Americans to be published in the United States. She was born free, although she championed to help those in bondage. Just her very connection with the other three bronze figures on the Equality Circle speaks volumes to her message regarding equality of all people, especially African Americans and women. I also have an even more closeness to this esteemed woman. I am the manager of the William C. Goodrich Freedom Center Underground Railroad Museum in York, Pennsylvania. And this great woman stayed in the house at 123 East Philadelphia Street in York, which is now the museum. She was there to fill in for William Goodrich's son, Glenn Alvin, who was a school teacher and had to leave. Miss Harper also wrote one of her poems while she stayed in York. I could go on and on about this wonderful woman, but who could tell us better about Frances Ella Watkins Harper than Frances Ella Watkins Harper herself? Welcome, Miss Harper.
Thank you for having me. It is the pursuit of love and justice that makes the work of an individual so enduring. Their work must not be stifled or silenced, but passed on to each new generation. Unlike the attempt to silence me, and make me accept an unacceptable state of invisibility and a diminished value. Well, that started from the moment I was born, Black, but free. But like so many women of color who fought the good fight before my existence, and those mighty warriors who stood side by side with me, and the justice seekers who shall come after me, I flourished like them, in spite of the oppression and pain. What an honor to have my memory held sacred in that monument. But even more of a blessing to know there are women in the 8th Ward, in Harrisburg and beyond, who continued to do the great work of pursuing love and justice, using the written and spoken word as their sword and shield, like Gwendolyn Bennett, famed writer, actor during the Harlem Renaissance. She lived in Harrisburg and during her high school years was an honor student, but went on to champion and flourish in the 1920s. You know it as the Harlem Renaissance. And then Jessie Matthews Vaughn, who, like me, was orphaned and abandoned. I was so young, too young to be abandoned. My father was gone before I was born. My mother died at the age of 3 before she could redeem me from the shame of being me. There was much shame associated with being a colored woman. But it was in my writing that I was able to shed light to uncover the darkness about man's inhumanity to man and woman. I accepted my calling when I was quite young and became a model student, like Jessie. And I devoted myself to words and learning, not boys, and Latin. Oh, how I did love Latin. Cum libertate omnibus. With liberty for all. That is a fight that I would take on with my words as my weapon. People in time tried to silence me. Silenced by the passing of time, as my first publication, entitled Forest Leaves, was not found in your modern libraries or those information devices that you are constantly looking at, that you gaggle, Google. It was not found there for 150 years. And now, one copy exists in the archives of my home state, Maryland. I was born in Baltimore, in just south of that Mason-Dixon line in 1825. I am reminded of another one of your women greats, Alice Dunbar Nelson, a poet, speaker, activist, and Harrisburg resident. Her book, Masterpieces of Negro Eloquence, was actually published while she was in Harrisburg. She took up the charge of love and justice for the disenfranchised. And in 1915, much like I did, she devoted herself to mobilizing women in Pennsylvania to join other states that had given full or partial vote to women. That reminds me of, it was spring, May to be precise, 1866, when I was invited to the 11th National Women's Rights Convention in New York City. I was seated on the platform with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. I must admit, I did shake things up a bit. I stepped to the podium and I began what you all read as "We are all bound up." I feel that I am somewhat of a novice upon this platform, born of a race whose inheritance has been outrage and wrong. Most of my life had been spent in battling against those wrongs. We are all bound up together in one great bundle of humanity, and society cannot trample on the weakest and feeblest of its members without receiving the curse in its own soul. Well, you all tried that in the case of the Negro. You pressed him down for 2 centuries. Society cannot afford to neglect the enlightenment of any class of its members. This grand and glorious revolution, which has commenced, will fail to reach its climax of success until throughout the length and breadth of the American Republic, the nation shall be so colorblind as to know no man by the color of his skin nor the curl of his hair. It will then have no privileged class trampling upon and outraging the underprivileged classes, but will then be one great privileged nation. And I do not believe that giving the woman the ballot is immediately going to cure all of life's ills. And I do not believe that white women are dewdrops just exhaled from the skies. You white women here at this convention speak of rights. I speak of wrongs. In advocating the cause of the colored man, since the Dred Scott decision, I have sometimes said, I thought the nation had touched bottom. But let me tell you, there is a death of infamy lower than that. It is when the nation, standing upon the threshold of great peril, reached out its hand to a feebler race and asked that race to help it. And when the peril was over, said, you are good enough for soldiers, but not good enough for citizens. The room was so still and silent, you could hear a pin drop. They did not endeavor to invite me back. 30 years passed, and I was still active in the struggle. In 1892, at the age of 67, my novel, Iola Leroy's or Shadows Uplifted, was published. And there was such a flurry around my book, being one of the first published by a Black woman. And a few years later, at the age of 71 years old, all of my advocacy work led me to be a co-founder, right alongside with Harriet Tubman, Ida B. Wells, and many others. We worked together and founded the National Colored Women. That was in July of 1896, and this started the Black Women's Club movement. Our motto was lifting as we climb. Your historians crowned me the mother of African American literature. You can't silence a queen any more than they tried to silence your Martin Luther King Jr. I am Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. Say my name. I refuse to be silenced. Well, on February the 20th, 1911, in Philadelphia, my earthly temple wore out, and they placed this shell of a body in the same grave as my precious daughter Mary, who I had outlived by 2 years. But I saw my dream come true, as I recorded in one of my most famous poems. I ask no monument high or proud to arrest the gaze of passers-by. All that my yearning spirit craves is bury me not in a land of slaves. The Civil War abolished slavery, but civil rights will make us all equal, and that is the ultimate freedom. Free at last! Free at last! Thank God Almighty, we are free at last! Are we? There's still work. Good day.
Thank you, Mrs. Harper. Thank you very much. And thank you, Mayor Papenfuss, and all our committee guests. Mr. Mayor, I want to just remind everyone that as much as we love the monument, it is not a home for pigeons. It's a turnkey for knowledge, and we hope that people come there with knowledge, discover information there, and go back into their communities so that the monument is yeast and not stone and bronze.
Thank you, Lenwood, and thank you, Ms. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. We shall say your name, and we're going to give you the last word today. I thank everybody for watching Community Conversations. We'll be back again next week with a conversation about faith in the time of coronavirus. But until then, stay safe, be well, and I hope everyone enjoys celebrating Women's History Month.